All right, thank you everyone for attending tonight's meeting. A study session, just a couple things on the docket. So let's see, I'll look for an approval of today's agenda first.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And a second by Mary Jo. Any discussion at all? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Oppose the same sign. Motion carries, the agenda is approved, so our study session starts off. Tanya has got an interim grant report update on a non-exclusionary discipline grant. And floor is yours.
Good evening, School Board, Chair Klott, Superintendent Krenz. We are here this evening. Jamie Donaldson is our MTSS coordinator for Albert Lea Area Schools. She serves in this position pre-K through 12. We're here tonight to present updates on two of our grants, the Multi-Tiered Systems of Support Grant and our non-exclusionary discipline. On the agenda, it's listed as two separate items, but you'll see as we're presenting why we have it packaged together as one. Starting with our strategic directions, when we are looking at each of these two grants, specifically looking at how we are amplifying student learning, fostering a learning environment that prioritizes student success for the whole child. And then both of these grants are heavy around personal and professional growth for our staff. Our first grant that we'll cover tonight is our Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. The language directly from the Department of Education is to improve academic behavior, social, and emotional outcomes for all students by providing a layered system of support. The focus of the grant is to use database problem solving and decision making to identify our student needs and then implement the appropriate interventions. You have seen me present this graphic before. This is from the Minnesota MTSS model. Within the Minnesota MTSS model, it has 5 core components. Each of those components have their own benchmarks within each of them, representing various areas of the multi-tiered systems of support. So really focusing on our infrastructure and continuous improvement, family and community engagement, those multi-layers assessment, and then database decision-making. This year, last year, our admin teacher leadership team completed a 6-session cohort for that district leadership team to go through training around these 5 core components. This year, we expanded that out to a 9-session cohort and learned additional pieces to help solidify our knowledge in those areas before it moves down to the school level leadership, which will happen this fall. So that's the next step in the grant cycle, is to now move from district level leadership training to school level leadership. MTSS grant had 3 goals. The goals were focused on academic achievement in reading and math, and then the third goal was to focus on out-of-school suspensions. One thing that we've worked really hard on this year is taking, even within our grant work, so many times in education it feels like we have so many things. We have Title, we have MTSS, we have CAKER, we have NED, we have HRS. How are we pulling all those things together under a singular umbrella, and then how do they fit in? And so if we really use our comprehensive achievement and civic readiness, which used to be our World's Best Workforce Plan, is that big picture overarching, how do each of these pieces fit in? And as we were writing goals last spring and summer for these grants, One of the things we wanted to do is keep all of them aligned so we didn't have multiple things happening. So the language you see is consistent with the language in our comprehensive and achievement readiness, that performance measure. The first one was FAST A Math. Our goal was to increase from 58% in the spring of '24 to 61 in the spring of '25. That goal we did not meet, and I will have Jamie talk through our progress and achievements in the math area.
So looking at our FastBridge, that early math assessment that we give our kindergarten and our first grade students, there was one school that, while overall our proficiency was 53% at the beginning of the year to 76 at one of our elementary schools. The grade 9 proficiency in math increased also from that 59% to 64%, which is a 5% gain, and we were looking at 3%. So if you look at that grade in particular as well, that grade achieved their goal that we wanted for them. And then proficiency for second grade went from 42% to that 46% as well. So those were our gains that we saw in math. I know they did a lot of different interventions in the elementary school. They were looking at new interventions to help to see what we could do with math. So they were trialing bridges. I think that's one they trialed that this year, and they're looking into potentially implementing more of it next year. The high school, the ninth grade, no, it was eighth grade. No, it was eighth grade class. They had additional help from their teachers as well. So they were doing some additional math work with them.
Our second MTSS goal is our reading goal. In reading, we were looking at grades 2 through 9 in that low risk and above average categories, increasing from 43% to 46%. This goal we are just shy of meeting. So some nice progress here that I'll have Jamie share.
One of our schools had the third grade teachers, both of the third grade teachers implemented the UFly Foundations. It's a foundational literacy curriculum, and they use that for intervention time with their third grade students that were struggling in that area. And they had significant gains throughout there. And then one teacher in particular, her class went from that 42% to 59% being proficient by the end of the year. Significant gains there. And then our kindergarten teachers, they finished their 2-year structured literacy letters training this year. And we saw one teacher's class go from that 35% at the beginning of the year proficient to 68% at the end of the year. Significant improvement using the strategies that we've learned in structured literacy.
So I think one of the things that we see, particularly with these two pieces in reading achievement, I think it speaks to we're seeing strategies when implemented with fidelity that are working. So now how do we replicate that in other places across the district? I think particularly we know that foundational literacy is so important. So how do we tap into this success in this kindergarten classroom? And we know that we won't perfectly duplicate it across the district, but how can we best replicate what's happening there so that we can see greater proficiency rates in kindergarten and first grade that will in turn lend themselves to success down the road.
The proficiency increase, it's measured just by classroom performance, or is there any other standardized testing used?
We have the standardized e-reading test from FastBridge. So at the beginning of the year, they were assessed with 4 different subtests. And at that point, it was the 35%. And at the end of the year, when they were tested again, they added those tests together. Yeah.
The third goal within MTSS, this is where you'll see that MTSS and NED are packaged together in our presentation. Because our third goal of MTSS is the same goal that we used for our non-exclusionary discipline grant. And that was to work on reducing our special education out-of-school suspensions from 23%. And rather than choosing a number to reduce, we really are looking at having no more than the percent of our special education students identified in our district demographics. Because that's really where you look at disproportionality. I stumble on that word, disproportionality. So that is our goal for both MTSS and non-exclusionary discipline. Non-exclusionary discipline falls under that work. The language for the non-exclusionary discipline grant is really to develop a professional learning plan for our staff to implement non-exclusionary practices. And then our focus area, as I stated, for MTSS as well, is reducing out-of-school suspensions in those areas of disproportionality. When you look at the overall achievement for the district, and you don't pull out special education students, and you don't pull out non-white students, our rate of improvement is a 31.6 overall reduction in out-of-school suspensions. So we've had professional development around this work, and we've seen an overall reduction. So last year, we had 567 out-of-school and in-school suspensions. This year, 388. So looking at the overall, it looks good. Now, when we drill down our data a little bit deeper, where we know we need to do, so that we're really targeting interventions, this is what we're looking at. So the first goal of special education, so we wanted to reduce from 23% to no more than the district demographic. So our overall, when you look on the far right of your screen, the overall district percentage is 21.5% of our students receive special education services. However, when you look at the column directly to the left of that, you can see that the percentage of special education students, either the overall occurrences of out-of-school suspensions or the number of days students spent within out-of-school suspension, far exceed our district percent. So this tells us we have lots of work to do within special education, disciplinary action, how we're responding, interventions that we're putting into place. It might be what accommodations or modifications are present within the student's IEP, but definitely work to do under the umbrella of special education out-of-school suspension. For curiosity's sake, I pulled in-school suspension as well to see if that was out of line, if it was disproportionate as well. This one looks better, but there's still a little bit of imbalance there. We would want that number to be under 21%. But in-school does look better. The second goal, So next step, what are things that we need to do to address that disproportionality? As I mentioned with the special education students, really targeted professional development for staff, working with Executive Director Reby and the assistant directors that will be coming on board on that targeted professional development. Working with Jamie in the implementation of tiered behavior supports, and looking at special ed specific interventions. And then we know we need to address some equity-focused data monitoring and intervention teams. Jamie can speak a little bit to the Tiger support teams and what that's looking like for the upcoming school year.
So we do have Tiger support teams at each of our schools. The elementaries, we meet once a week for about half an hour or so, and we talk about the kids that we're looking at needing interventions within the general education classroom. Those don't target specifically special education. The special education would go through their case managers. But we talk about interventions that we think would work for them. Teachers have to fill out paperwork ahead of time so we know what is the area we're targeting. And then we'll look at the CASEL standards for social emotional learning and see what we can pull from the CASEL standards and interventions that might match with our students' needs. We do that at the middle school as well. They also meet with the teams because we can't have, it's a little bit different at the middle school and high school. We can't have the teachers necessarily all come in for one student, whereas like a second grade teacher can come in and meet with us and talk with us a little more. But the counselors there, the counselors at the it's the social workers at the middle school meet with the teams. And then they come back, and as a team, we come back and we talk about what are the needs for these students. And we look at just different interventions that will work. I think next year we're gonna focus a lot on like the check-in connect, the check-in, check-out interventions, just because they're using those at the high school as well. We've picked a couple at the high school team that the teachers have been trained in, so that way there aren't so many different types of interventions, and they can dip their toes in a little bit, get used to these, and then after they feel comfortable, then we can look at a few more different types of interventions for our high school students that are struggling as well.
And not to put Executive Director Reby on the spot, but she also is looking at weekly meetings with her special education teams next year, and specifically doing some case study type work where teams can bring a student to the table and they would discuss some of these pieces that we're talking about. Would you have anything more to add there?
Absolutely. We have done a lot of this in the elementary with teaming around a student concern issue, bringing all stakeholders to the table we need their voice, we need their input on how we can best meet the needs of our students with disabilities. And those meetings will be held weekly in a different format moving forward next year.
Really, the goal is to be very student-centered, data-driven and student-centered. So how are we determining interventions to meet the needs of our students? If we have interventions in place that meet the needs of our students, it should in turn reduce the need for either in-school or out-of-school suspensions. The second area of non-exclusionary discipline was to reduce the non-white out-of-school suspensions from 55% last year to 48% by the end of the grant period. Again, in the data, you'll see a significant difference. District on the right, we're 45% non-white in our district, yet the number of occurrences and days served are significantly higher than our district percentage. And again, out of curiosity, I pulled the in-school suspension data as well, same story. So in looking at future plans as it relates to serving our culturally diverse student body, we really need to look at expanding that anti-biased and culturally responsive practices. We did have some implicit bias and cultural bias training this year. Unfortunately, it fell pretty flat. Staff feedback, admin feedback, my feedback, it just didn't serve our needs really well. And so I've been talking with admin teacher leadership on different ways that we can meet that need. The consultant we had just didn't serve our needs, so we need more work there. Strengthening our restorative practices and student voice. The middle school is doing a beautiful job with this work. They have really started implementing some great things. They started implementing lunch circles this past year, which are going really well. They're seeing positive trend lines at the middle school level. So continuing to work through their student voice and then doing some more work around restorative practices. They have secured a training in August to continue that work of student circles and student voice. So that's exciting. And then looking at how do we build that out at the high school level. But we have to be realistic about student buy-in too. That's important. So finding those interventions that work at each level. And then again, continuing those equity-focused data teams, and Jamie will be a piece of those data review teams at each of our schools. Elementary level engagement specialists were great, so our future plan for that is to continue having those engagement specialists supporting students, working through the intervention modalities that they have learned through life-space crisis intervention. We will have to look at how to build that out at the middle school level at some point in time. Part of the non-exclusionary discipline grant funds end this year. MTSS grant funds continue for one more year. And then we are able to apply, the MTSS grant is a state grant. So a new state cycle will open and we could apply for another MTSS grant. That being said, some of our professional development is in federal funds. And so right now, we are still in a holding pattern on any federal funds for Title II, which is all of professional development, Title III, which is everything related to English language learners. So when we look at these future plans pieces, some of that is hanging in the balance until we get our approved funding in Title II and Title III. We have approved funding for Title I currently, but not II and III. So how much of some of those things can we do? If we don't have that federal funding, then as you know, that falls back on our 2% set aside and what that could potentially look like. So that's those big picture impacts. I wanted to give you an idea of where we have spent our funds for non-exclusionary discipline in fiscal year '24. That went, a portion of that went towards elementary deans, approximately $69,000. That OGAN came through, an OGAN is your award certificate. That came through really late in the year. So that's why that funding for FY24 is less. FY25 is completely focused on professional development in Teach to Heal, life-space crisis intervention, and cultural bias. We did get an additional $3,500 to spend by October 1st, and that will help with a July training for life-space crisis intervention. And then MTSS financial report, FY24, a funded partial year of our MTSS coordinator position, and then 25 and 26, the funds go towards our MTSS coordinator position. So that was on staff, and then we built our plans around that. Where is the future of multi-tiered systems of support? Again, I'll let Jamie talk through that.
So in looking through all of our data and the proficiency of our students, it showed us that we really need to focus a lot on class-wide interventions. There are so many students not meeting proficiency that we really need to focus on how do we get them to be better readers and understand reading across the content areas. So we really want to focus next year on providing those Tier 1 classroom, class-wide interventions. Progress monitoring. When our students are in interventions, we want to make sure that what we're doing with their intervention is matching the progress monitoring tools that we're using. Next year, we'll have a little bit of change with the assessments we have to give our 4th through 12th graders that don't score proficiency, and those will give us some different tools for our interventions so we can find, we're going to use as many open resource interventions that we can so we don't have to pay. And they provide those interventions for us. So we're hoping to find some progress monitoring tools that will match those as well. And that goes along with the effective intervention and those curricular resources. We have UFly I'd like to see used more in our Tier 2 class because we saw that intervention work with those grade 3 students that used UFly. So I think we'll do a lot of implementation with the UFly, being that we're noting those positive trends. Our meetings for that database decision-making, we need to do that more frequently at the secondary level. The elementary is very good about looking at the data on a frequent basis, but it's just taking it to that secondary level because it's not something that we're used to, that we've been forced to do for years. So it's just being more mindful of, okay, it's been this many weeks, let's look at the data for sure to see how they're doing. And then, okay, now we're at the 8 weeks, let's look at it again. So that way we're continually monitoring how the students are doing.
We also built out, when we're talking about database decision-making, we also worked with our MTSS coaches this year and our administrative team to build out a schedule to, when they're having their database meetings at the school level, that then we also pull that up to a district level and have those district level discussions around our practices and the multi-tiered systems of supports, so that we can see, we can identify what are the trends within our buildings, but then are we able to identify trends within the district? So how do we build that out better? Go ahead.
And a lot of our phase 1 teachers, those are our K through 3 teachers, our multilingual language teachers, our special education teachers, and our intervention teachers. Most of them have completed their structured literacy training or will be completing it next year. That is required by the state of Minnesota. So we're seeing a lot of good gains for those that have finished. This year, what do we have? Our kindergarten teachers all finished. We have some intervention and ML teachers that will finish with me this summer. I don't know the combination of the other group. There are some other second,
mixed
third
groups
grade.
now.
They're mixed groups that will also finish with me this summer. And then next year, we'll get through the rest of them and add more to our core OLA, which I don't facilitate, but we have a national facilitator that'll do that. So they'll all get through that by the end of next year. And thinking about literacy training for our paraeducators, they are also required by the end of next year to have structured literacy training. That will be an 8-hour training, and it'll be throughout 4 different sessions. So there'll be 2-hour sessions with me. I just found out today that they will not have any homework. I asked some questions in a meeting, so they don't have reading outside of it. It's just what they learn from those 2 hours that they get with me, and I'm going to training on that next week to find out what exactly we have to do.
We do have that built out in our professional development calendar for next year as well. Worked with Sheila on what our paraeducator calendar, work calendars are. So that is built out for next year for Jamie to, she did train the trainer. So now she'll be able to complete that within either our district gray days or our academy days. So we'll be able to do it within our para contract.
We'll also, at the suggestion of you, Kim, we'll also be planning some parent information sessions on literacy. We're training everybody else on literacy, so we need to take that home. And my plan is to do some training with our elementary, some for middle school, and some for high school, because literacy looks different at all 3 levels. I can't just cover them all in one. So sometime throughout next year, each level will get some training for parents. There is additional MTSS school leadership training that Tanya spoke about before. And Compass, through the state of Minnesota, is providing additional training that many of us are going to participate in. There's some specific data literacy and assessment training that I'll be part of. There's some tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 intervention training that I believe the coaches and I are going to be part of. And just different, they have parent, there's a parent like a family involvement training too, they suggested maybe we look at.
Yeah, we're
That's
looking at the
available.
family and community engagement, taking that training so we can learn different strategies to engage the community. And then Jamie and I are also doing one on the MTSS handbook, how to write and implement a quality MTSS system in your district. All right. I will provide this full MTSS grant report in your board update, so I'll put the link in there, and you can read through all the details that weren't in the slideshow. But for that snapshot, do you have any questions?
I have a few.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, okay. So the grant, when we talk about disproportionality, it's racial, not economic? So
Not
it's like
economic,
Okay.
no.
Have we looked at that data?
I do have that data too that I
That'd be
can break
interesting.
down.
Yeah.
Yep, I will include that. I'll include another link for that data.
Okay,
Yeah.
that'd be great, thanks.
Yeah.
Um,
The other, I'm sorry. The other piece that I'm working on that principals requested at our last admin teacher leadership team meeting is right now, that data that you looked at is district-wide. We're also breaking it down by building. So special education by building, ethnicity by building, and I can do FRP by building as well. So that's the next piece that I'm working on breaking down for our principals, because they're going to help use this data also to write their continuous school improvement plans.
Right, yep,
Yep.
okay. The 69,000 for the elementary deans, was that per dean, or was that 69,000 for all the deans?
Yeah, it's so in FY '24, the year started out extremely wonky. We didn't have 4 deans hired yet at that time. So at that time, we had 1 dean that was serving all 4 buildings in a traveling capacity. So that $69,000 was just towards the dean bucket, not per position.
Okay,
Yep.
so compensatory or title or something?
Picked up the rest. Compensatory was the rest of the dean, yes.
Okay. The slide on the Teach to Heal, I'm just going to share, just in visiting with lots of parents and meeting with lots of veteran teachers, I think there's confusion in the district where Responsive Classroom is, where Teach to Heal is, where are we going? And I think that brought up a lot of the parent concerns this year of the language and maybe not a clear direction to families on what it is. And if it is truly a tier 1 method versus Responsive Classroom, not sure. And I'm not sure where we are with Responsive Classroom either, so.
Yeah.
But I heard that from veteran teachers, and that was just like, okay, we do need clarification on that.
I would wholeheartedly agree, Mary Jo. We heard that a lot this year. I think part of the disconnect is that Teach to Heal is, it's not a curriculum. It's not it's not even interventions or strategies like Responsive Classroom. Responsive Classroom gives you tangible strategies to implement in your classroom. That's not what Teach to Heal is or is. It's more about trauma responsive knowledge and how to have that knowledge in how you engage with students in your classroom. That being said, the feedback that we heard this year was a lot of exactly what you just described. And so we've been talking through at the cabinet level and with administrators about if it fits, where it fits, and how do we move forward. We're really seeing that the life-based crisis interventions, which actually provide tangible modalities, are having a greater impact than we've seen in our Teach to Heal training. And Sheila had a number of consulting things lined up with our Teach to Heal consultant. And for various reasons, we've kind of looked at she's definitely revamped that plan and what that looks like. We'll finish out the series. The next part is skills language. Administrators have looked through the skills language, and part of what we're looking at doing is providing a guiding document that lines it up for staff. It's more alike than different, but it's about communication and how we're presenting it. Principal Kennis and I and Sheila have talked a lot about how can we close some of those gaps for everyone. I think we can get there. I think we have some good ideas about how to do it. But we have to provide a tangible resource for staff and families.
Okay, great. Yeah. Just
Great.
sharing what I'm
No,
hearing.
I love hearing that. Thank you.
And I think the last thing on the suspensions, and it goes back to the parent meetings and the parent presentations we've had at the school board, and I know Superintendent Krenz and I talked about this, is, back in the day, as a teacher, we used to know kind of by a behavior plan chart, this is suspendable, this is like a 3-day. Elementary, it might be a 3-day for a fifth grader, it might be 0 for a kindergartner based on
Right.
what it is. So obviously it changes by grade level. And Superintendent Krenz asked me, do we have that? And I said, yeah, we used to a while ago. And so that might be something that we want to, based on his advice of improving our behavior plans because I think that's the thing we're hearing from teachers and obviously parents, is what is suspendable? What is not? What is in school, out of school? And I think just that whole, we can always improve. So it's just working on making that a little clearer for our staff and our parents.
That is on our elementary principal summer workflow list.
Oh,
So.
You got a lot done this year, Superintendent.
So they are, one of the things that they're going to work on is a list, just like you described. The areas that we talked about are things that are classroom managed and things that are office managed. And then again, like you said, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, making sure we're being transparent in citing, some things are challenging when statute is involved, so make sure we're citing when statute is involved too. But that is on the summer workflow chart. I do think, are you feeling the same way at the middle and the high school as there is at the elementary, or getting that same feedback at middle and high school, or do you feel that that feedback's more coming at the elementary level?
High school.
At the high school level?
A student will
I
be
figured
sent to
it
the
was
office
elementary.
for a certain behavior, and they might be back 5 minutes later.
Oh.
And that teacher's like, I sent him for this reason, I don't expect him back in that classroom during my period. Well, if we don't have it laid out, and we don't have clear expectations,
Let me because I can even picture the chart we used to have. Let me do some double checking on that. I can see the chart in my head. Okay. Good feedback. Okay?
and thanks for the presentation, and, it's
No, great
informational.
questions. Thank you, Mary Jo.
Well, and I'm glad Mary Jo asked about the Teach to Heal, because at this point, based on feedback from staff and parents, I have a lack of confidence in it at this point, to be very honest with you. And then I think I'm hearing that there's overlap between Teach to Heal and this life space crisis intervention. Am I understanding this right?
Teach to Heal is not it's not an intervention, it's not a curriculum. Life Space Crisis Intervention gives you tangible interventions to implement. How would you describe? It's a paradigm. Teach to Heal is a paradigm. It's not a curriculum or an intervention. It's learning about trauma responsive practices.
And we've seen success in our elementary setting 3 classrooms, particularly at Sibley. For example, how they arrange their environment. What does their space look like? We have a Tier 2 teacher in one of the settings who has done a fabulous job this year with what does her space look like? It was so busy. She had so many things in there, and how do we make that space student-friendly so that the students who walk in know, this is my space. This is what I can do in each space. So we have seen success at Sibley in our setting 3, but then you have the team together who implement and see it all the way through and working together.
But I think it's important to say too, when you see a 31% reduction in out-of-school suspensions, what do you attribute that to? Is it targeted intervention? Is it better use of data? I mean, help me understand. I mean, that's a significant decline, and I think we should celebrate that, but what do you attribute that decline to?
I am reluctant. I want to see what the breakdown of the data looks like by building. Especially after hearing some of Director Dorman's feedback, particularly with how we are doing in-school and out-of-school suspensions at the high school level. Because if there is potentially behaviors that are occurring, but we're back in class within a short amount of time, is the feedback that you have gotten, then yeah, there should be celebration, but I would want to unpack it a little bit more. And I would want to get feedback from the building administrators in if they have a decline in their suspensions in their building, what they would attribute it to. I think at the elementary level, our life space crisis using those intervention modalities are a plus at the elementary level. But at the elementary level, we only have suspensions, you don't have suspension K-3. Okay, so that looks different at the elementary level. I think at Southwest, when you look through the full report, Southwest would attribute their restorative practices to increase or the decrease in suspensions because of the relationship piece. So I think we should dig into that a little bit more and ask those questions.
Fair, and this is where my head is at. And I think looking at data by building makes sense, but again, with the concerns that have been brought forward to the board, I'm developing a sense that building leadership is linked to the effectiveness of dealing with on-site student behavior. Am I on the right track thinking that way? Because I'm making that conclusion.
Okay. Superintendent Krenz, do you want to speak to leadership?
I think it's important, Gary, and that's a good question and a good and right concern. That consistency that we were talking about, that Mary Jo asked about the disciplinary practices, lacking that guidance, and there's a wide variance between administrators. I don't necessarily believe that it's because one is better than the other. It's just where do I begin? Where do I start? It's mostly about the experience that we're seeing. And I think it's important to have that in place. I know our discussions with Sheila and the administrators and Tanya about the Teach to Heal, we're being more directive and selective in who's going to be trained on that. As Sheila pointed out, our Tier 3, it really works. But is it something that every teacher needs to have? And I think we backed off on that. And that's important because it does provide an opportunity for confusion by those teachers. Discipline starts in the classroom. We all know that. And that classroom teacher needs the support of the principal so that when a student is sent to them, they're communicating the same message. And I think that's the second. I know Steve and I have already had those conversations that system-wide, we struggle to have a consistent message that is relayed all the way to where it needs to get to. Sometimes it's lost just at the cabinet level. Sometimes it's lost from the principals to the cabinet. But we've got to put in place a system. And I know in talking to him, he's a systems guy, much like I am, and that'll get straightened out. We've got people who want to do the right thing. It's just a matter of how we train them, how we help them, how we guide them to get to that point. Discipline is something that no one says a thing about until it doesn't happen. And just like a superintendent, what's the quickest way to lose your job as superintendent is not have a reality what your budget is. Well, we've figured that out. As a teacher, the worst thing you can do is not have classroom management. We've got to figure that out. Not that they don't want to have classroom management, but when you don't have the guidance, you're afraid to do anything. And we have a lot of people now that are coming in, first year, second year, tier 1, tier 2 teachers who've never been in a classroom before, not even as student teachers. That's really, what do I do? And how do we put in place the supports to help them? When we talk about student supports, we got to have that for our staff too.
Thank you.
Very good. It's a great discussion, by the way, and good questions, and thank you, Tanya. Teach to Heal, of course, any teacher, any educator agrees that we must teach to heal. It's, if you were a math teacher, it'd be a postulate or an axiom. It's one of those self-evident truths that we all do. But doing it is not simple. Teaching, educating is not simple, and it's an art. And figuring out how you teach a student to deal with that student's infirmities, to heal whatever's wrong with that student, is an art, but it's also a science. Everything is. I like your comment, David, about the teamwork that must exist between the teacher and the building leader, the principal. It's very much like an athletic team, and there's a lot of science and there's a lot of art to that too, and good team members work well together. And that's a combination of data, which is the science, but it's also very much dependent upon the artistic ability of all those involved.
Thank you.
How is it over the, well, first of all, when we set our goals for the NED and for all these other programs, MTSS, is that something that's done at the local level, or is that done more at a state level? As per a grant, you were talking about some of that, because as I see, we didn't meet any of the 3 goals. And that my next question would be, how is that compared to the last 2 or 3 years? Because I'm sure the program's been around longer than that.
Right, so Multi-Tiered Systems of Support grant is a state-level grant, but the work of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support happens all over the nation. Minnesota specifically is MTSS. And they have specifically identified a framework around that Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, which showed those in that slide where it showed the 5 components: infrastructure, assessments, the MTSS. So that's Minnesota's structure of MTSS. This year, so we've only had the grant for the last 2 years. So when you look at our the results based on our goals, that's based on the 2 years that we've had the grant. Prior to that, to my knowledge, and I might tap into Mary Jo, I don't think we've had to report anything specific to MTSS to the state, only our World's Best Workforce Schools, correct? Yeah, yep. So the only thing I've done differently, Chair Claude, is that I've taken, with these grants, I'm trying to align it to comprehensive and achievement readiness, so we don't have all the different things. I really want us to hone in our focus.
I was just curious, Because it is startling, to see that we didn't meet any of the goals, and to see a 46 on, which Jamie and I talked about after the curriculum, especially in reading, because we know that's foundational, right? And so strategies around that. But I was curious about the trends relating to those. You talked about some wins at different places.
Yep.
So and you talked about next steps that you're going to try to tap into that. Can you tell us, give us like a little snapshot of what that, have you worked on how you're maybe going to tap into that, or strategies you're thinking about, and then also, are there like common threads or barriers that we're not able to replicate that, and what could this team do to help with eliminating some of those potentially, or the district help?
Right. So specific to reading instruction, we know that we really need to focus on continuing to improve Tier 1 core instruction. What do all students get? Part of that is our literacy training that, is mandated by the state, but that's great training for staff to learn about how, especially our K-2 teachers in foundational literacy. That is so important. And when we shared some of those big wins, a couple of those big wins are a result of that foundational literacy training that they've received. So I'm excited to continue to grow that. We also, with the adoption of our new curriculum, as with any adoption of a new curriculum, there are growing pains. Like, that is not something that you can shy away from. That's real. But how do we continue to work through a strategic implementation of our core curriculum K-5? We're also working through our K-7 adoption this year as well. So those strategic efforts in strengthening our core instruction is really important. When you talk about barriers, a couple challenges that, in fact, we worked on our local literacy plan for a couple hours this afternoon. And particularly at the middle and the high school level, when we're talking about interventions, Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions, it just looks different. Middle school and high school, they run on a schedule. They're changing classes every 43 minutes. Now we're in high school in 9th grade and we're earning credits. Okay, but I'm a below grade level reader. How do I work towards earning credits but read at the 3rd grade level? What does an implemented intervention look like? And so Jamie and I were talking through our local literacy plan today in scheduling. What does scheduling look like? What does a length of an intervention look like for a middle or a high school student? What interventions do we implement at that level for student buy-in? Because they might be a 7th or an 8th grader reading at a 1st or a 2nd grade level, but you have to have them buy into that phonemic awareness intervention. So those, when you say barriers, those are some of the challenges that we have to look at and really figure out how do we address them. Can you think of other things we touched on today?
I think we talked about content literacy, content area literacy also.
Yep.
It's very, we all, in order for our students to access whatever they're learning in their classroom, what do they have to do? They have to read. So they're reading in every single classroom. And how can we find those connections for literacy and those specific content areas? So we're looking at, I found a document that has like literacy in the fine arts, literacy in science, literacy in mathematics. So I want to share those with teachers. And we've talked about what kind of those class-wide interventions. How can we structure those reading interventions in those content areas? Or how can we help our content area teachers become better at the literacy teaching? But again, we have to get that buy-in with them as well.
Yep.
I was just thinking of the piece of that. They're not, the academies are wasn't the academies,
Pathways?
The pathways?
Yeah.
That's That's the hook, right? If there's something that they're interested in, this is the literacy that's gonna match up with that. I think that would be great. Because that's what we see at the next level too. Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's important to understand too, kudos to Tanya and the staff. These are stretch goals. Those weren't just easy, and the easy one would have been all of our students excluded. We would have easily met those goals. But taking the goals that are more impactful to our student bodies and knowing that we are having an increase in our special ed populations and our non-white populations, those are really critical to us at this point for the district to be successful. So as we look at that, I think it's important to understand that we weren't able to see the data, but to get to the overall district lower, there had to be lower in those areas. So it's not as if they went up, they still declined, it's just they didn't decline where we believe they need to be. And we're only given usually about an hour. And I'm gonna put a little pitch in here, and I know we shouldn't be advocating for spending money, but one of the things that really made impact as we looked at goals in previous districts I've worked in is having a specific data individual. He was a math teacher. Why do math teachers always deal with numbers, huh? He was a math teacher, but he worked specifically with staff, specifically with administrators, showing the data, showing those small details. And because of his background as a math teacher, he could also talk about strategies and how to reach many of the goals that the previous districts had. In today's data-driven, artificial intelligence world, that position is really a critical one, something to think about. Not that Tanya doesn't understand it, she does, but there's only so much one person can do.
Well, and I think the other key is that K-3 class size for early literacy, that's where we have to hit the mark, because we know after third grade, it's more than a mountain to climb. So class sizes matter in K-3, and the support, the title intervention, having intervention teachers. So I think when we spread ourselves too thin in other areas, we're losing the number of intervention teachers we've had. If class sizes are getting larger, those are all concerns. So those are things I think we all need to be talking about.
I think that's a good point too. I think when we look at our data at this time next year, we will be a little thinner in intervention at the elementary next year, as well as middle school. So it'll be interesting to look at those two pieces side by side as well.
When it comes to the out-of-school suspensions, what type of behaviors are we typically seeing there that cause that to be needed?
Again, that would be a question I would want to ask of the principals, since I don't work directly with the suspensions. I mean,
Okay.
there's suspensions that occur that are automatic. Weapons, tobacco, marijuana, disorderly conduct, those sorts of things are going to be your automatics. But like specific pieces, I would ask the principals to speak to that. What's that? Fighting, yep, yeah, definitely. Okay. All right, thank you. Again, I'll provide the full grant report in the board update.
Good. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the agenda. Just a couple announcements. today. Some have heard, some haven't, but our high school principal, Chris Dibble, has resigned to take a similar position at Northfield High School. I did have an opportunity to talk with our incoming, with our interim superintendent today, but also our incoming Dr. Steve Heil, and he just gave me a little bit of a rough timeline. They're hoping to have a posting out by this Friday, and then by the end of June, first part of July, do a screening process, and then maybe set up interviews by the 7th. He was going to send out an email to the staff there to let them know what's going on. He's also planning on doing, I think Darcy, isn't he planning on doing some surveys and things like that? So all sorts of things in the works there to work with that situation. And then finally, as we run to the end of 60 allotted days or so, David, thank you so very much. I think from myself, and I think echoed from all of us for your help here, starting the process toward our new full-time superintendent. It's been much appreciated. You've spent a lot of time on the road. Thank you to your wife for sharing you with us. I never got to do. Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, I think we've got a position that she should maybe look at here in town too. That's open, but no, thank you so much. Safe travels, enjoy that retirement, and again, a lot of the results of things we won't see for some time to come, but appreciate it. I know you'll be in and out as we go and always available to us, but thank you from us for the time you put in, so. Without anything else, our next Monday, June 16th, we'll have a regular meeting here at 5 o'clock. No meeting, no study session, July 2nd. So then we'll move right into a July 21st regular meeting at 5 p.m. here. Thank you very much. Enjoy the summer as it continues to unfold.